Welcome back to the show, everyone. We are real excited. We have a guest today, Kendra Cooley, who is going to be talking about the is SOC 2 Type 2 dead? And this is an interesting topic, Kendra. And Kendra and I have known each other for a while. And she put out a post recently on LinkedIn that got a lot of comments and interaction. So we're really excited to have you on the show, Kendra. And as a starting point, would love to just have you tell everybody a little bit about your background. And I love to always hear the story of how you got into security. And then we're going to dive into this topic and go back and forth a little bit on just this change that we're seeing and you're seeing as well. On if you have a SOC 2 Type 2, so what? Like, are you really secure? No. So, yeah, love to hear you tell just the folks that listening a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thank you both for having me. I'm really excited to be on the podcast. So, yeah, I'm Kendra Cooley. I've been in the security industry in some facet for about 13 years now. And I got my start as an administrative assistant working for a large insurance company in Michigan, which is where I'm from. And I joined as the administrative assistant to a VP of information security. And so during that time, I remember so vividly sitting in my first risk meeting, hearing all of these crazy terms being thrown at me. And I'm so glad I had a voice recorder because I had to go back and listen to that like 15 times in order to type up the meeting minutes for that. But over the period of time that I was there, I had the opportunity to start shadowing some of the other folks on the security team. And there was one gentleman in particular that I really, really enjoyed what he was working on. And it was the computer forensics for the organization. And it was a lot of like misuse of company assets. So people doing things on their work machines that they shouldn't be. And I thought, hey, like maybe I should get into this. So I ended up going back to school to get a degree in computer forensics, but had zero intentions of using it for security. I actually thought I was going to try and help put like child predators away, and very quickly realized that just was not for me. And so after feeling like I had wasted about 3 years of my life, my VP that I was working for was like, hey, like, do you realize that everything that you've learned is applicable to security? Why don't you give this a shot? And I'm like, oh, like I had this vision in my head of like being in a dark hoodie in my basement, like just hacking away on a computer, like total isolation. And I'm an incredibly outgoing, like people person. So I was just like, I don't know if that's for me. And so they gave me the task of creating a security awareness program for the entire organization. And this was around the time where like the Ashley Madison hack happened and all that. So I had a lot of juicy things to talk about. And that was where it really clicked for me that at the heart of what security is people. And that has really kind of propelled me through the rest of my journey. So I've been super fortunate to work for companies like Duo Security, Webflow, MailChimp, and then most recently was Flock Safety. And I've done a number of things from like incident response and program development all the way through full scale program building of security and IT. So it's been quite a journey. And then I guess on the personal side, if you'd like to me to share that, I am a new permanent resident to Canada. I've been here for about 2 years. My husband likes to say that he rescued me from the US. So I have moved from a cold climate to the coldest climate. And we got about 25 inches of snow the other day. So I'm just trying to survive.
25 inches. Oh my
In
gosh.
one
Being
day.
in
We're expecting
Florida, I
more.
don't understand what that's like.
Do you go outside?
I do as little as possible. I'm trying to learn like to enjoy winter more. So we bought skis and stuff this year, but I swear I get bruises just thinking about going out on the ski slope. So I try to avoid it. I do love ice skating though. So like if I have to go out and do some winter activity,
Yeah,
that is my jam. But
there you
skiing and
go.
I are still learning to love each other.
Yeah.
Wow.
Are you like
You know,
out there
you're
doing triple sow cows or are you like just basic?
Just basic.
I love your story, and I think what connects to me the most is I can hear your passion coming across, right? So your passion and having a mission, right? So wanting to put away child molesters or predators, whatever you called it, that's a mission that you're connecting what you can contribute to. So I love that passion, and then you're pointing that to whatever you're working on.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I was bummed that I couldn't make a go at that in my career, but I also just knew it takes a really special and I would say kind of like hardened person to be able
Yeah.
to handle that type of content day in and day out. And it's not me, it's not my personality. So I'm happy that I was able to at least take the skills that I learned there and turn them into something else.
Yeah. Well, speaking of passion, I think it's a good transition. The passion that you have to see a true security program was, I think, part of what kind of spurred this idea to put your thoughts and tell us a little bit about how this post came out. They got like 300 different likes and multiple comments, and everybody in the security community seems like they're kind of chiming in on this. And I think it's a topic that we need to dive into, and that's why we wanted to have you on the podcast. But real quick, yeah, the story of how you came up with this was very interesting.
Yeah, I was in the shower washing my hair on Wednesday morning, and I was like, I don't know why I was thinking about SOC 2, but crazy shower thoughts. And it kind of hit me that all of the experiences that I've had over the last several years in either getting companies ready for their SOC 2 or like helping them build their programs, and just kind of starting to see this shift with these SOC-in-a-box platforms coming on the scene more and more. And just what used to be when the SOC 2 audits rolled around, the whole company was like all hands on deck, like this is a big deal. And now it just seems like, for better or worse, in my post, I was nervous. I'll just say that, about putting it out there, because you never know what someone called them keyboard warriors, are going to say. So I was nervous about putting something out there that I felt was like somewhat controversial, not necessarily calling out any particular platforms, but basically just lumping a bunch of them together and saying like, look, I think that this is causing a fundamental problem in how we're approaching SOC 2. We've taken a framework or an audit, and we've really just kind of narrowed it so much down and automated it beyond belief, to the point where now it's like the responsibility of one person in an organization. And I don't really feel like that's kind of the heart of where SOC 2 or really any audit comes from. So the post came from a bit of disappointment. I also may or may not have poked at some audit firms by saying that I think they've gotten a little lazy in using these SOC-in-a-box platforms. And I would say overall, the comments were pretty similar. I think there is a general I don't even really know the word, like distaste for this process now in our industry. So it was very interesting to see.
It's interesting, Kendra. I've been learning more recently, more hands-on, and I've gone probably through somewhere around 50, 60 audits in the last 6 months, where I'm looking at companies, generally small to medium size, that SOC 2 is basically all they have, right? So they might not have an additional compliance. They might not have an actual security program. This is it for them, right? So I'm identifying that it is a baseline, right, for having a program. And this is being used more of a framework versus a byproduct of a security program, right? And the value is more to their customers than anyone else, right? Imagine all those vendor management programs out there that want to make sure their vendors, especially like in the SaaS space, are secure, right? So typically a SOC 2 report is exchanged when your clients are reaching out and saying, prove to me that you have a security program. They might also add a SIG questionnaire on top of that, which is a general questionnaire that's asking what are some of your key controls. But it's kind of a checkbox exercise at this point, right? It no longer, I think, has the value that I think, to your point, was maybe originally intended, has now very much become a compliance exercise, and it's a minimum standard that your clients are looking for. And I will tell you, it is a minimum baseline, and companies that don't have it are worse off than companies that do have it. Now, does it mean that's where you should stop in terms of what you're trying to achieve in terms of a security program? I would say no, right? What are your thoughts there?
I completely agree with you. And I think that's the resounding sentiment that I was getting through a lot of the comments as well. It's like, I do believe that there is a place for SOC 2. And for the last 6 months, I was looking for my new role. And one of the places that I was going was through the Y Combinator list of companies, and just kind of poking around and seeing what new companies were popping up in the startup space. And I was absolutely astounded at the number of companies that I was clicking on that were very much in their infancy, barely had seed funding or Series A funding, and they were SOC 2 compliant. And I'm like, this is really interesting. But then you go and you looked at like their linking company profiles and you search for security. They don't have a security practitioner on staff. And so there is definitely an understanding in our industry that the SOC 2 is basically like your ticket to even get a conversation with that organization.
Yeah, I think that's well captured.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when a lot of the clients that I've worked with are typically software companies, like where
Mm-hmm.
Kendra's really spent most of her time. And typically we would get to this point of a search for a first time head of security. And here's a couple of the reasons, right? Like we're getting just tons of questions from our new clients because we've moved to B, or our new client base is much more strict on security requirements. And so we've got to go through SOC 2 Type 2, right? Like we're working on that. And that used to be kind of like the goal almost like, well, let's just get this done and then we're good. And we'll have a security leader come in and build a small program around it, or hire a security leader and then outsource to managed services, which I'm seeing, unfortunately, to be a much more common move for a lot of smaller companies that just can't afford to build their own teams right now. I think a lot of it's budget driven. But
Yeah.
what do you think is the future? I guess that's for both of you guys. Like, what do you think is going to be the future here? Because obviously the landscape is becoming more and more complex, but the breaches typically are still happening from human error, right? For the most part, it's a lot of just bringing everybody on board, ensuring that the whole company has a better understanding of what it means to understand cybersecurity. So, what are your thoughts on like certifications like this? Is it really going to be valid in the future? What needs to happen with these kinds of organizations to align to true security standards?
It's a great question. I have kind of two schools of thought there. So, for a little bit of background, the last two companies that I joined as security hire number one, their driving force for bringing in a security professional was they wanted SOC 2 Type 2. They were going after the enterprise space, and they knew that that was, as I said before, kind of their ticket in the door to even be considered by customers. And I'm very happy that the two organizations that I joined thought enough to bring in a security professional to help them through that, versus where I think the industry is going now, which is we have so many of these SOC-in-a-box solutions that are literally saying get SOC 2 compliant in 3 days. There's no need. There's no need for people like me anymore. If that's their ticket in the door and that's all that your customers are looking at is making sure that you have a clean SOC report. And a lot of the things that people were bringing up in comments too, it's like almost like pay to play now. You can pay an auditor to get a nice stamped report and then you're good, right? Like who is actually further digging in? And I think it's going to be the larger enterprises who end up having to learn some tough lessons, or even some of those like small, medium businesses who end up learning tough lessons by trusting these third party service providers and ending up with some type of data leak or whatever before they actually start to invest. So I almost see this as like like a get rich quick scheme, almost like from the 90s, where people are just like, okay, how do we get from A to D as quickly as humanly possible without having to spend all of this capital, especially in a time where people are trying to cut costs and do more with less. And I see both sides of it, right? I think these SOC-in-a-box things have a place. I think as security practitioners, there are so many things on our plate on a daily basis. And so having that automation piece is great. But from my perspective, like I still want my auditor to dig in. I don't want them to come in and look at a dashboard and say, oh, yeah, this all looks good. No, because I know what's hiding behind the curtain. And I want you to ask those questions. And I rely on my auditors to point out the things that need improvement, because that's how I get budget to continue to build my program successfully. Don't come in and just rubber stamp.
Budget and value.
Exactly.
To add to what you said too, right? And I've been learning a lot more in this space since I've started consulting. Companies that are starting off, right? They're trying to stay lean, right? And as they grow, especially like in the SaaS space. So a SOC 2 is a way to at least get that conversation with customers without being thrown out the door, right? It shows that you have something without a whole lot of investment, right? Because if you hire a staff, if you go spend money on tools and technologies, these things cost money, right? You're going to be, most likely investing early in your life cycle before you're necessarily profitable, which is a challenge, right? So they're balancing risk that way, whether it's a calculated decision or uncalculated decision, right? Where it's unquantified risk. And a lot of times what I see is they chug along having a SOC 2 report and having cybersecurity insurance, and also like a managed services to do some of the services that are expected, like security monitoring. So it's really balancing those three things. And then that to them is enough for that moment in time until they get large enough where then it becomes a problem, or they have an event, to example you used. So if I waved a magic wand, right, I don't know if I would do a whole lot different at an early stage for a company as well, right? But I think there are ways to bake security in, and I've seen a lot of this being well done. And those are some of the challenges you have if you don't have someone that's security minded early into your platforms. You're going to be creating tech debt for yourself, essentially, right? And the cost of paying that tech debt later down the road is going to be higher, right? So imagine you don't have security built into how you're authenticating with your application. Well, once that application is live and you have clients on there, it's going to be more expensive now to add the right controls later down the road versus early. So there are pros and cons on both sides. But if I had a magic wand and if you asked me what would I do different to ensure compliance versus checking the box, is start relying on industry frameworks that already exist, right? Very similar to like a NIST cybersecurity framework or CIS frameworks, and map even your SOC controls to those, where being SOC compliant can be a byproduct of your security programs. They will be more investments up front, but you can also manage that as well with having a well-structured risk management program, right? Where maybe you're not investing in all those controls day one, right? You can add those as you go, but then you're prioritizing and you're discussing which ones are critical today and then which ones can wait. And then you can use that type of framework to continue your maturity going down the road. And I think it'll be interesting as we look at new regulations coming out. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the SEC regulations that they want to, add more to any public companies. I'd love to get your thoughts there as well. How do you meet those type of requirements, right? Is that going to become another certification on top of a SOC 2? Is SOC 2 going to get revamped? Will that move the needle?
I think those are all excellent questions. And I'm sure it's no surprise to those of us on the call and hopefully those listening, but like these frameworks are generally several years behind the current threats, right? I mean, like think about the fact that NIST only removed password rotation from their list of recommendations in 2018. Like we've all known for years and years that users just change a number at the end. That's not security. So as far as laws and regulations, I think that we have to move to a place where companies are held more accountable. But a lot of what we see today in terms of holding those companies accountable is once the breach happens and then they're found negligible. So it's more about taking like a proactive approach to these frameworks and the requirements of security and then actually making sure that they're followed. But I'm sure this is going to be kind of just like a continuous cycle where people are going to see this as an opportunity to automate something or like find an easy button. And we're just going to be back in this, like in this process. So I think a lot of what needs to happen, and again, there were a ton of comments on this in thread too. It's like leadership in these organizations have to actually understand what their threats are. And they have to build a risk management program that meets those. And then we as users of these third-party services have to actually take the time to do our due diligence and understand fully what data they touch, what purpose they're providing. Is it a critical vendor to our business? And assess that way. And again, more comments on this. Like it's nothing that I'm saying here is anything that's like out of this world. The scope of these audits. If you read the scope of some of these SOC 2 reports, they're almost not even useless or not even useful to the platform that you're purchasing or the part of the tool that you've purchased. So we have to go in with such a fine-tooth comb to identify like, okay, sales team, what was that tool that you wanted to use? Oh, well, the scope of the part of the product that you're looking at isn't even included here. So here's my questionnaire that I now have to send out. Well, you can answer anything you want to a questionnaire. There's no one there with a third-party attestation verifying that what they're saying is actually accurate. And 9 times out of 10, if you ask for like vulnerability scan results or things of that nature, they're not going to give that to you because that's internal use only. So where do we go from here? Like, it's an accountability problem. It's so many layers deep.
Yeah, it's a discipline problem, I think, as well. I
Mm-hmm.
think with the evolution of generative AI, what has that also done? It's caused us to think, oh, we can automate this away. We can automate this and get all of the results and not have to do the work. Yeah, I love your analogy of going back to like the 90s get rich quick schemes. It's like, oh, well, all you got to do is sponsor like 10 people and they do this and I make millions of dollars and I don't have to work anymore. And this is coming from someone who was in a network marketing business for a number of years. But yeah, it's like, this is kind of what we're seeing as far as a mentality shift. So human behavior is really what affects everything in technology, I feel like, right? Because like, it's all about the user using it and the one who's developing it. So you've got a couple interesting problems. You've got a quick shift in technology that's changing the way we think and kind of getting us a little bit lazy on certain things. Then you've got the auditing firms that are kind of also stepping back a little bit. There's less discipline, there's less rigor to be able to continue to increase profits and not have to necessarily bring on folks that are going to require a higher salary maybe, or maybe the training budget goes down so they don't have to spend as much time training these people. So it's all like a ripple effect. I feel like from what I'm seeing, like as a non-technical guy, that's what I see. I don't know. What do you think is as we come back around, right? Like what would be the future predictions of what you're going to see change in this side of the industry?
Yeah. And I mean, before we go on to that too, I would like to say, like, to be fair to these audit firms as well, like, I don't think that it's realistic for us to expect the folks that come in and audit these systems to know every cloud software, every dev tool. Like, that's unrealistic. So in
Sure.
a lot of ways, these automation platforms are really helping to get that job done. And they're allowing these firms to hire folks probably at a lesser rate that can go in and get the job done, but maybe not to the same level of quality as we've seen in the past. I don't know if y'all have anything you want to add to that before we move on to the next part.
I would say absolutely, right? I'm in a similar space there where someone would bring me in not to help with getting audited, but to actually check their security posture, to do an assessment based on an industry framework where I'm going deep, right? And I have that experience. I have that knowledge. I've built programs. I've ran programs. So I understand what it's like, but I'm more expensive than a typical auditor, right? So
Absolutely.
having me do an assessment versus someone that's fresh out of school and you give them a template and you give them a tool and they just go and ask these basic questions and fill it out, you're getting, to your point, two different levels of quality. And it's towards the demand. What is the demand asking for, right? They bring me along when they want those hard questions answered, not just checking the box, right? And then that's just the assessment side. What about validation? Are you actually testing your controls, right? That's even more expensive, whether you're doing a penetration test or you're looking for artifacts in terms of all the controls and seeing that the actual controls are in place and actually tested. It's another layer that we offer on the consulting side, but is it something that a company is going to invest in, especially when the requirement for them is just typically having that certification starting off with?
Yeah.
So it really goes more towards the mindset of people and what they need versus how the auditors are positioning themselves to provide that commodity service. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as far as the predictions go, I have a long list I could probably get lost in. So we've already touched on a couple of them, right? So I think we're going to continue to see these SOC-in-a-box platforms create a space where organizations can at least get a start in that baseline of security without needing security presence necessarily on staff, which at the end of the day is going to end up saving them money. My fear there is that when the time comes to actually invest in security, whether it be because of a breach or a larger enterprise customer is demanding more from them, they will have invested so much going down perhaps a wrong path that now they have to undo what they did previously to kind of reset them back on track. Other predictions I have for SOC is that I think more and more security leaders are going to continue to hold them with less value and just start to probably come up with their own better third-party assessment process, which honestly I think is needed and valid anyway. But I think we're going to start seeing things that are a little bit more strenuous, like Microsoft's SSPA. I think it's what it is, SSPA. They have a pretty strenuous like third-party process that their vendors have to go through. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. A lot of the driving force for SOC 2 that I've seen for organizations over the past is not only that sales enablement, but also to get out from under all of those questionnaires. I don't think that the SOC 2 is enough anymore. I think that we've become too wise to the gaps and what's missing. And so we're going to end up seeing more questionnaires that are being requested to be filled out. So those are some of my predictions. I have more, but I'm curious if y'all have any thoughts too.
I think you nailed it with really the tech debt response, right? So meaning companies will catch up and realize that they took the shortcut with a SOC 2 and now they have tech debt, right? So meaning they do an actual assessment based on an industry framework, and even those frameworks are limited. To your point, those frameworks aren't up to date to all the current threats, right? So then it becomes an investment, right? Are we going to be seeing more investment in security, more controls, more people, process, technology, right? And that to me is where I see it dying, right? How are you gonna bring people's awareness there, right? And that's where you have great leaders that think about security up front, and then you have leaders that don't want to invest in security and do the minimum that they need. And that's where I see like the SEC, at least for public companies coming into play, or other type of regulations that are going to raise the standards, what's required in terms of like a minimum investment in security. So I think to your point, we're going to see maybe more standards kind of being, here's your top security, here's your medium, and here's your minimum type of audits moving forward, right? Kind of different flavors to select from. And then if you do have events, those would be the questions that they ask, right? And then the tech debt can be more expensive based on what you predict. But then I worry about how do you raise the needle across the board versus one company at a time, right? How do you raise that awareness that this is what you should do? When companies rely on cyber insurance to help bail them out a lot of times, right? I think that's where you're holding people more individually accountable, I think is going to come in, but we'll have to see how that plays out, especially for non-public companies.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the foundation for my post too was to start a conversation. I didn't anticipate quite as large of a conversation as it turned out to be, but I really do hope that like the AICPA like starts to look at the SOC 2 controls and actually like rethink about the threats that companies are facing today and how they can adjust what the language is there, and then firms come up with more standardization in how they're actually testing these controls to make sure that they are providing the adequate information and giving those qualified or unqualified opinions with a little bit more thought.
Yeah, great thoughts, everyone. I think this was an interesting conversation. Kendra, we really enjoyed having you on the show, and keep up doing the great work that you are. And I think I love the just humble side that you bring to this industry, the just looking at what really works, and very, I guess, the practicality of how you approach security. It's just awesome to see, and I'm sure you're going to continue to grow and succeed as you continue your career.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and definitely enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully it continues to spark more conversation in the industry.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you. Keep up the good fight,
Thanks.
Kendra.
Thank you. Bye, all.
Bye-bye.